Okay, hi everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the first of our three-part series here. My name is Josh Ellis from the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I want to welcome all of you to the beginning of our series here on water resilience in good times and bad. We're going to have a three-part series between MPC, Elevate Energy, and the Natural Resources Defense Council. Where we'll be discussing water-related issues that have been exposed for some, or perhaps just some of us have been reminded by some of the vulnerabilities in our water systems in this moment of COVID-19 and economic shutdown, and talking about strategies as we come out of this to make sure that we build back better and have water systems, whether that's drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, that work better for all of us. Couple of quick housekeeping issues. We will have a slide with information about the rest of the event series in just a moment. We have events the next 2 weeks and hope you can join us for those. Our speakers today from Elevate Energy and the Natural Resources Defense Council are Caroline Packenham, who is from Elevate Energy, and then Jeremy Orr from Natural Resources Defense Council, and then my colleague, Dr. Justin Williams from the Metropolitan Planning Council. I think what the three of them are going to share today are, again, some lessons about where Illinois sits in the national context of the COVID-19 moment and water issues, some specific challenges that have been manifest by this experience for a wide variety of people, and then some things that we can do about it moving forward. Today, you should all see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you do wish to submit questions, you can type the questions in there. We're going to use the chat window to share links or other resources as they come up, but we won't be monitoring the chat for questions. We'll be focused on the Q&A window there. So please submit your questions there. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for folks who weren't able to join us in virtual person today. So we'll share that link afterwards. And you can choose a number of views. If you want to choose the speaker view, that's great, but we'll be sharing slides in just a moment. Again, questions on Q&A, I'll be filtering those and peppering the presentations from Carolyn, Jeremy, and Justin with those. And then we will have, I think, substantial opportunity on the second half of this webinar for a lot of question and answers and some discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn the screen back on. I mentioned the next two events in our series. The second one is a week from today at the same time, May 12th at 3:30 p.m., focusing on water affordability issues in Northeastern Illinois. Some of that will be alluded to in today's presentation, but next week is much more detail about what we do and don't know about water affordability and how that has played out in this moment. We'll also talk about shutoffs, reconnections, and essentially access issues for drinking water as related to water affordability. And then the third event in this series is more about stormwater and water quality issues. I'm mindful that we had flooding over the weekend, and thankful that it wasn't worse than it was, but think about this moment of social distancing and needing protective gear, and do we really believe that if we had flooding bad enough that we had to evacuate neighborhoods, you can't put people up in the high school gym like you would have last year at this time. Are we really prepared to deal with those sorts of issues as the wet weather is on us this spring? So that'll be the third event, May 19th, again at 3:30 p.m. Yeah. And with that, Caroline's going to join us. Welcome, Caroline. And she's going to say a few words, and then we will go right into her presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. Again, I'm Caroline Packenham, and I'm the Water Program Manager at Elevate Energy. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Elevate Energy, we're a nonprofit organization, and we design and implement programs, energy efficiency and healthy housing programs. And our water program work, it really focuses on ensuring all residents have access to clean, safe, and affordable drinking water. And what we are going to do today is talk a little bit about how COVID-19 is revealing some challenges with our water systems, particularly in regards to water affordability and water utility operations. So what I want to do is kind of give you a brief overview of some of the challenges that we're seeing exacerbated during COVID-19, and then also give you some initial thoughts on how we can begin to address some of these challenges moving forward, and certainly look forward to discussion later on how we might all be able to tackle these challenges together. So if we want to go ahead and flip to the next slide there. So I do think it's really important to start by talking about the water affordability challenges that we've seen prior to and really during COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19 hitting, it's estimated that around 15 million people across the country have their water shut off each year. And living without water, it is an incredibly difficult challenge in and of itself. But when you throw in COVID-19, where hand washing is really absolutely critical, the situation really does become even more dire than it already is. So in response to these concerns, hundreds of utilities across the country and around a dozen states, including Illinois, have called for a moratorium on water shutoffs. And many have also started the process of reconnecting residents to water service. And reconnecting water service, it really has proven to be a difficult challenge, as we're finding that some utilities don't have accurate or comprehensive records on who needs to be reconnected. And then we're also seeing that utilities, they're not really set up to reconnect customers at this mass scale that needs to happen right now. We're also finding reconnection to be challenging because it is really beneficial to have a plumber or water utility staff in someone's home to ensure that there's not a broken or leaky pipe when that water is restored. So you do have public health precautions that need to be taken when you're doing that. And then layer on top of that, if someone does have a leaking or broken pipe, how do they afford a plumber to have their water restored when they couldn't afford water to begin with? So water reconnections during COVID-19 have really shown us, it's easy to turn water off, but incredibly challenging to restore it, especially when time is of the essence during this pandemic. And concerns are also rising about how residents will be able to pay their bills after the pandemic is over. So I think it's really important for us to all really start thinking about water affordability and how we can really craft solutions to help residents out in the future. If we move to the next slide, I also think COVID-19 is really bringing to light many of the workforce challenges that water utilities throughout the country and in Illinois face. Prior to COVID-19, water utilities had concerns about an aging workforce, upcoming retirements, and their ability to attract qualified candidates. And in fact, an aging workforce, it consistently ranks as one of the top concerns for water utilities. And this is according to findings from an annual survey that's conducted by the American Water Works Association. During COVID-19, staffing concerns continue to be at the forefront of the mind for water utilities. And a few weeks ago, the Illinois section of the American Water Works Association, they conducted a survey about the impacts of COVID-19 on water utilities in Illinois. And what it found is that staff health, availability, and continuity of operations is really a top concern for water utilities in Illinois right now. Our utilities are also noting that the skills of their operators, they are really specialized and they're hard to find and difficult to replace. This is prior to COVID-19, but especially during the pandemic. I will also note that our country and Illinois, we do have many small water utilities. And at a small water utility, you may have a very small staff. So if only one or a few people on staff are ill, that does significantly impact, your community's ability to provide safe drinking water if you do have staff fall ill. And if you think about it, all of our water utilities are facing the COVID-19 challenge right now, so it's not as easy to rely on each other during these dire situations. In addition to the staffing concerns being at the forefront of minds, water utilities are also concerned about running out of PPE equipment, having disruptions to their supply chain, and then also experiencing reduced revenue. So these are just a few of the challenges that have been noted in Illinois and that we're seeing bubble up throughout the country. If we want to flip to the next slide. So I think a lot of the challenges that we're really seeing come to the forefront right now, and again, a lot of these existed before, but we're really seeing exacerbated during COVID-19, I would say, is challenges with water affordability, data management issues at water utilities, the need for better emergency preparedness and planning, and then overall workforce challenges in the water sector. And so moving forward, I think it's really important for us to talk about what we can do around water affordability rates and programs, and not just at the local level, but at the state and federal level as well, to really better support residents who are struggling to pay their water bill. We also need to work with and support our water systems to update and streamline their data systems and meters. Our water utilities should know who needs to have their water restored. COVID-19, it's also showing us that more thought and planning should be given toward emergency preparedness. So really providing support, training and resources to develop and implement emergency plans. Also ensuring we have networks in place for information and resource sharing. And a lot of these networks do exist, but kind of learning lessons from those networks to ensure it's widespread everywhere. Finally, I think COVID-19, it's really driving home the need to ensure that we have a strong pool of water industry professionals in place to provide safe and clean drinking water. So really working to establish the water workforce of the future, thinking about how to establish networks of retired utility staff, and exploring ways to do remote monitoring and work to ensure that we're really prepared in future emergency situations. So these are just a few of the challenges that we're seeing. We can flip to the last slide. In regards to COVID-19 and our water systems right now, but again, we really want to hear from you the challenges that you're seeing. And I think we all need to come together, residents, water utilities, community leaders, to really figure out what some of the solutions are to address these solutions moving forward. And looking forward to discussing this in more detail during the Q&A portion today. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. Next, we're going to go to Jeremy Orr from NRDC. There he is. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks so much for joining us today to share some thoughts about how Illinois fits into the national context.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for having me. I know this is an issue that's been at the forefront of NRDC's work for quite some time now, and really glad to be doubling down on this drinking water work in Illinois. Again, my name is Jeremy Orr. I'm an attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I work on our Safe Water Initiative, which primarily focuses on drinking water enforcement and contamination, as well as affordability and access. And I'll just be giving a brief picture of Illinois' water infrastructure in the context of America's overall infrastructure, and just some weaknesses and opportunities and ways that we can better invest in our water infrastructure.
Sorry, Jeremy, 2 seconds.
No problem.
There we go.
So you can go to there we go. So, it's no secret that America's, infrastructure is aging right across the board in all areas of infrastructure, and water is no different. Our water infrastructure, I guess it's for starters, there are over, 300 million people that receive their water, into their home via, a public or community water system. That's over 90% of America that is, receiving water through, a normal system or some smaller system. And that water is, transmitted, from surface to treatment to our homes, across, over 1 million pipes, and on the receptive side, it takes place over the course of 1.3 million miles of sewer. And it's estimated that, dealing with this infrastructure, we lose over 6 billion gallons of water per day, right? And that's across America, right? So to put that into context, on an annual basis of lost water across the country, that's enough water to drown the borough of Manhattan in New York, right? To put it completely underwater. And that's how much we're losing, annually. And a big part of that is because our infrastructure is aging, it's crumbling and it needs to be replaced. So we're talking about infrastructure that was, laid in the mid 20th century. And we're really near, the end of that lifespan, right? Where our water infrastructure may have a lifespan of, 70 to 100 years. If it's laid in the 1940s, 1950s, we're at a space where it absolutely needs to be restored. And, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, we have a grade of a water infrastructure grade in America, anywhere from a D to a D plus. Next slide. And, I think it's important to understand that Illinois is no different in that context, where our infrastructure is aging and needs to be replaced nationally. The same can be said for the state of Illinois, right? We also have a very old infrastructure, right? A crumbling infrastructure, a very prototypical Midwest infrastructure that's been around for a long time in our drinking water system. And one thing that's become very clear over the last 10 years or so is that our systems are at capacity. Our infrastructure is at capacity, and it's limited in the amount of water that it can move safely and adequately through our pipes and mains, right? So systems that were only meant to carry X amount of gallons of water per day are now carrying astronomically more than that into in the homes and buildings at this point. And that results in a lot of issues, right? Whether it's main breaks, whether it's leaks, right? And all these things that come with the repercussions of water loss and water waste, right? And I think, as we talked about, America's losing billions of gallons of water a day. The same can be said for Illinois, that's often losing literally millions of gallons of water per day as well. And I think the other piece of that, as we get into infrastructure, old infrastructure, is our lead service line infrastructure. That's an issue that's been more prevalent around the country, especially in the region and in Illinois for the past 5-6 years or so. Is that something needs to be done about the lead in drinking water issue in America. And as it stands right now, Illinois is at the forefront of the number of lead service lines that we have in the ground in America. So we have the most, right? It's estimated. So that's a weakness we can work on and present on some of those opportunities shortly. I think the other thing I've recognized is just the lack of asset management plans in many places, where I work and work around the country as well as Illinois. Just the inability to really grasp what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and what time frame it needs to be done in. Realizing that asset management plans aren't widespread, right? And that's for a number of reasons. I think one of those reasons could be insufficient funding, right? Whether it's at the state, local, or federal level, but in particular in Illinois, the lack of funding and financing resources to get this work done, which really negates the idea of even having an asset management plan if there's no meaningful way to fund that. Thinking of all that, while this grade that we have of a C minus is a little better than that DD plus that the American rating got for water infrastructure, it's still a lot of work to be done, and we could be doing way better in Illinois.
Slide. Jeremy, quick question before we advance. Someone asked that 6 billion gallons a day. That's a day, not per year, right?
Correct. Yep. That's a day in America across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming off of these shortcomings and weaknesses in Illinois' infrastructure, there are some great opportunities that set the stage for us to really invest in water infrastructure here in our state. One I think is as very obvious one, as many Midwestern states, is proximity to fresh water. Right, there's no shortage of it, but we have an opportunity to be much better at protecting our natural resources and finding innovative ways to, to get that water from, from the surface to, the homes and those who need it. I think the other thing is just, kind of heightened public awareness, at a time where, drinking water contamination is really, at the forefront of people's minds. And even as we're in the midst of, the COVID crisis and realizing that, the best thing we can do to protect ourselves and our communities, is wash our hands, which involves access to, having, clean, safe water to do that in. I think it's, it's really prevalent, and it creates a unique opportunity at this moment in time. I think the other thing is just the potential that we have to, be a leader, in the United States. As I mentioned, there are a number of areas of drinking water and wastewater and water infrastructure in which, Illinois has a major problem, but that also sets the stage for us to find major solutions which can really lead and drive what, other states around the country are looking to do. And I think one thing I've also noticed is just the expansion of low-income assistance programs, and as well as, kind of looking at exploring setting income-based rate structures, as my colleague talked about before, just this issue of affordability, right? Assistance and affordability. So I think there are, plenty of opportunities, coming down the pike at the state level to say, there are communities that need more support. There are communities that, still nonetheless, still have this access and right to water. How do we make sure that, water is affordable and that we can still adequately fund our water systems? And I think as well, just the political climate and political will in Illinois, right? Being in a space where, there is, political leadership that may be interested in having these meaningful conversations about investing in water infrastructure from a number of different angles, puts us in a position that we haven't been in quite some time. So, thinking of it from that angle as well. Next slide. And then lastly, before I close out, just, I think all of this stuff means nothing if we don't have, the financial resources to fund these, physical water infrastructure projects that we're thinking of and that we're talking about on here today. I think some of the investments that, are being made or are available and that could be made, are kind of listed here. So just thinking through our clean water revolving fund and our drinking water revolving fund in Illinois, right? So these are, federal funds that are available for, water systems and municipalities to seek, kind of low interest loans that they could seek out, to do these water infrastructure projects. In many instances, low interest loans, and also in some instances, loan forgiveness opportunities there. The other at the state level, very similar, is our, Illinois low interest revolving loan fund, which has, again, low interest rates funded at the state level as opposed to the prior two at the federal level, in which, municipalities and water systems can seek support from to do this work. And I think too, just the idea of there has to be some creative ways and innovative ways to create funds, spread across, all ratepayers and taxpayers to fund the greater good of water infrastructure across the state. Because these aren't just issues in urban areas, but they're issues in rural areas as well, whether it's drinking water or, stormwater management, just the idea that there is support behind creating a fund to do this. And I think just at the federal level, just overall federal investment in infrastructure, I think we're having these, conversations, and we're seeing these conversations take place amongst, our federal representatives around these COVID stimulus packages and, support that's needed on the ground. And water has very much been, a part of these conversations. So just continuing to push our federal representatives and our federal government to really invest in infrastructure. And I think that's critical because there was a time, right, where, and not very long time ago, where 70% of all, state and local water infrastructure funding came from the federal government. And we live and exist in a time now where that has decreased astronomically to about 13%. But yet the need for, upping our infrastructure and renovating it is actually more of a necessity now than ever before. Next slide. And that's all I have. I think, some of these issues that I touched on will, be touched on by my, colleague who will go next, Justin, but just, been a great opportunity to share, some of the thoughts and ideas of where we struggle at and how we can continue to progress on water infrastructure in our state. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. I want to welcome in my colleague from Metropolitan Planning Council, Justin Williams, who's going to pop up here in a second. Before Justin gets into some opportunities for things that we can do, I just want to remind folks, if you have questions, please do submit them using the Q&A function that is on your screen. One of the questions that we already got was that clarification on whether Jeremy meant 6 billion gallons per day versus per year, and it's per day. And we just had another question answered, which may be part of Justin's presentation about where the city of Chicago is with its lead pipe replacement. That, but then we Q&A. So keep submitting questions, and once Justin is finished with his, make sure we come.
Hi everyone, my name is Justin Williams and I'm an associate at MPC, as Josh mentioned, where I am on the research team. So as we on the research team have begun thinking about what COVID-19 means for the region, one thing we've been looking at is the role that water infrastructure investment might play in any upcoming economic recovery, economic stimulus package for the state. And what I want to provide today is just a snapshot of our findings so far. You can advance the slide, Josh. So before I talk about economic recovery specifically, I want to zoom out for just a second and point out that economic recovery is just one reason we should be investing in water infrastructure at this particular moment. And this is echoing a lot of the stuff that Jeremy, Caroline, and Josh already mentioned. But we tend to, at MPC, we think there are 3 good reasons to be investing in water infrastructure right now. And the first is to provide immediate relief to water users and utilities. And this includes doing things like reconnecting people without access to running water back to get them running water, and also providing revenue assistance to utilities, as Caroline talked about. Second, we need to make sure that we're investing in water infrastructure so that we can minimize the strain on communities and increase our collective resilience to shocks like the public health crisis we're facing right now. We know there are communities in Illinois where residents can't drink their water because of high levels of lead, which is something that Jeremy touched on. And this adds stress to an already really stressful situation for those communities. So investing in water infrastructure now means that there will be fewer of those problems to face all at the same time when something like what we're facing right now happens. And then finally, and then this is what I'm going to talk about from most of the day, for most of the rest of the day today, investing in water infrastructure can create jobs and add to overall state gross domestic product, thereby helping us to recover from some of the economic damage that we're facing presently. Next slide, please. So what kinds of returns can we expect from investing in water infrastructure? So this table here shows you 3 of the more prominent answers to that question. So on the left-hand column, you'll see the authors of 3 different studies who have investigated what kinds of returns we can expect on $1 million invested in water sector spending. In the middle column, you'll see the number of jobs that they've analyzed being produced through $1 million in investment. And on the right-hand column, the amount of economic activity generated by that $1 million investment. So as you can see, estimates range from 10 to 16 jobs created per $1 million invested in water sector, and a return of $1.44 to $1.64 million for every $1 million invested. The point here is that although there is some variation from study to study, we get some pretty substantial job creation and economic activity numbers by investing in water infrastructure. Next slide, please. And it turns out that the kind of job creation and economic growth numbers from investing in water infrastructure look pretty good when compared with other kinds of public sector spending. So what this chart shows you is the job creation benefit of water infrastructure investment as compared with other forms of investment, again, per $1 million invested. So as you can see, investing in water infrastructure creates a similar number of jobs as investing in other forms of infrastructure like transportation and clean energy, as well as the healthcare sector. All of those kinds of investment yield approximately 13 to 20 jobs per $1 million invested. Notably, investing in water infrastructure also creates more jobs per dollar than retail spending, income tax cuts, or military spending. Next slide, please. So what does all that mean in concrete terms? I want to put that in the context of one particular infrastructure example in Illinois that Jeremy talked about, which is replacing all lead service lines in the state. Just to level set, I want to give just a brief overview of what lead service lines are and why we need to replace them. So a service line is a pipe that delivers water to your home from the water main under the street. And you can see it on this diagram as the line running across, the horizontal line running across the bottom quarter of this diagram, right? It runs from that water main under the street and brings drinking water into your home. These lines may be made out of lead if the home or building was constructed before 1986. So these lead service lines, when they are made out of lead, can leach lead into a home's drinking water and are estimated to contribute up to 75% of the lead in drinking water. Lead, as many of you likely know, is a toxic substance which can cause some serious lifelong health and behavioral problems for humans if ingested. MPC and our partners, like folks on the panel at Elevate and the Natural Resources Defense Council, we all advocate for replacing lead service lines to reduce our exposure to this toxic chemical. So to just sum that up real quickly, service lines can be made out of lead, lead's toxic, and we need to replace those toxic lead pipes. Next slide, please. We also know that Illinois has a lot of these pipes to replace, and replacing them represents a pretty major investment opportunity in our state's health. So according to an inventory kept by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, there are about 686,000 known lead service lines throughout the state of Illinois. In addition, there are about another 1 million pipes of an unknown material composition that could be lead. So in other words, there are up to 1.7 million lead service lines throughout the state of Illinois. We don't think there are quite that many, but we really don't have a totally accurate count because of that large 1 million pipes that are of an unknown material composition. What the map on the right-hand side shows you is that this is a statewide problem. This map depicts the proportion of known or possible lead service lines as a percentage of total lead service lines broken down by county. So the darker blue the county, the higher the percentage of potential lead service lines. The takeaway here is that counties throughout the state may have significant percentages of lead service lines. So given what we know and what we don't know about the distribution of lead service lines throughout the state, MPC estimates that fully replacing all lead service lines is going to cost somewhere in the range of $8 billion over 20 to 40 years, and it would reach pretty much every corner of the state. Next slide, please. So that's a lot of money, $8 billion. The good news is that we can expect some pretty significant economic returns on that investment. So $8 billion over 20 years will produce roughly 7,000 jobs per year and $650 million per year in economic activity. To get these numbers, we took one of the projections I showed you in the earlier slides and multiplied it according to the amount of investment anticipated. There are some limits to this estimate. It's not an original model where we've looked at exactly what's going to happen with lead service line replacement in Illinois. Although it is based on some reliable estimates about capital infrastructure spending. It also doesn't account for things like workforce bottlenecks. Can we actually get 7,000 people to these jobs every year? We're working on addressing those limitations, but still what this information tells us is that a project of this magnitude can have really substantial economic impacts for the state. Next slide, please. So in addition to producing economic benefits like those I just showed you in the last slide, reducing lead exposure can also help us reduce costs associated with lead in drinking water that we're already paying. These costs include things like healthcare costs and responding to drinking water crises. For example, the Environmental Defense Fund recently projected that for every lead service line replaced, we as a society save up to $22,000 in costs associated with cardiovascular disease deaths. For reference, MPC is estimating that $8,000 is a generous replacement cost for a lead service line in the state of Illinois. What that means is for an $8 billion, back one please. Yeah, for an $8 billion investment, we could save up to $16.5 billion on these cardiovascular disease costs. It's a pretty impressive return, and it's just one of the potential health benefits that we would see as a result of replacing lead service lines. Additionally, we could avoid costs associated with lead in drinking water crises. In Flint, Michigan, for instance, the state spent $30 million on legal fees and $650,000 a month in bottled water costs in order to deal with the crisis that was created there. And the takeaway here is that we're already paying a price to keep lead service lines in our drinking water supply. By replacing those lines, we both reduce those existing costs and also generate jobs and economic activity. Next slide, please. I want to stress one really important thing here, and that's that if any infrastructure project like this is going to be a genuine recovery effort, it needs to ensure that people in communities of color are really intentionally brought into the hiring pipeline. We know that communities of color have been disproportionately hit by this pandemic, in large measure because of our nation's failure to invest in those communities. And so any infrastructure investment program needs to ensure that the economic benefits of these kinds of projects go to these communities that have been hardest hit. That's going to require some really thoughtful and careful program design and deliberate outreach. One example of this that I want to just highlight is the Illinois Clean Water Workforce Pipeline. It was a program established by a bill in the 2019 legislative session here in Illinois, and it provides grants and programming to train a diverse workforce, including foster care alumni, people returning to their communities from the justice system, and people from environmental justice and low-income communities, and to train them in drinking water supply, wastewater treatment, and stormwater management. It's just one good example of the kind of workforce training we need to focus on in any upcoming economic stimulus effort. Next slide, please. To close out, I want to reiterate that lead service line replacement is one important project on a longer list of water infrastructure projects that we need to be pursuing right now as an economic recovery strategy. Jeremy already touched on some of these projects that I've got listed here, things like green stormwater infrastructure maintenance and upgrading drinking water infrastructure, and there's a whole host of other ones. It's a smart way to provide employment opportunities in the middle of a major economic downturn, while also investing in our state's long-term health and well-being. Hopefully this gives you a sense of the kinds of economic impact that water infrastructure investment can have in Illinois. Thanks for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Justin, and thanks everybody. I apologize, my audio faded out before when I was speaking. I think my kids were trying to watch something on streaming internet. A couple questions did come in, and the first one I'm going to toss to Caroline. I think because we got so much into a discussion about how lead issues could be part of recovery and stimulus, we got a couple questions specific to lead, and Caroline was wondering if you could handle them. What is the best way to figure out if your property has a lead pipe, and then what do you do about it if you do have one?
Sure, no, that's a really good question. So it depends on what community you're in, but some communities in Illinois, there's about a dozen, they do have what's called an online water service line inventory. So you can actually log on to your water utilities website, input your address, and it will show you the material of the water service line that's connected to your home. So that is one way that you can determine what your water service line material is made of. I do know close to Chicago, the city of Evanston does have this online lead service line inventory where you can look up that material. If you don't have that type of inventory, you can certainly try calling your water utility. I know in the city of Chicago, when we've tried to kind of work with some childcare facilities to see if they have a lead service line connected to their building, we did actually look at the Water and Sewer Atlas to see the year that their water service line was installed to get clues about whether that might be made of lead. In Chicago, water service lines were required up until 1986. So if you're in a home or like a 1 to 4 unit and it was built before 1986, there's a high chance that you do have a lead service line connected to your home. Beyond the utility inspection, you can also conduct a physical inspection. So you could certainly ask a plumbing contractor to come out and take a look. Or I will say NPR has a really useful kind of app or website that you can go to. I believe it's npr.org/pipes. And it actually walks you through kind of a physical inspection you can do in your own home to see if the water service line connected to your home may be made of lead. So those are a few options that you do have, but we certainly hope that more and more communities will actually post inventory information online so that people do have access to the material of their water service line.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Caroline. One of the other questions that came in was specific to the city of Chicago and the status of its lead efforts. And I can start on that, and Caroline, fill in anything I miss. So the city of Chicago has, as Justin was describing, more lead pipes than essentially anybody else in the country, to our knowledge, and for the reasons that Caroline was just describing. And historically has not had an active lead service line replacement program. A couple of years ago, we started installing water meters, which we need in order to get to the income-based water rates that Jeremy was describing. But in doing that, that was shaking lead loose from pipes. And so the water metering program was shut down because we didn't have a lead pipe replacement program. The city has been doing some studies and trying to identify concentrations of lead pipes in communities throughout the city, and looking at ways to fund the huge additional cost of removing those lines above and beyond the huge cost of maintaining our existing water service. This is still a work in progress. I know there's multiple people on the phone who would love to be making more progress on that work in progress, but that's where things are in the city of Chicago. I will note that outside the city of Chicago, many of the suburban communities that we work with, Evanston, Rockford, others, are much further ahead on a proactive lead service line replacement program. They also have far fewer lead service lines to replace. Caroline, anything else you want to add there on city of Chicago and where they're at?
Yeah, no, I think you covered pretty much what I would have covered. I'm not aware of an active program right now, but I've heard, the same thing that you have, that there's exploration about how to make this happen. Great.
Jeremy, you have also been working in Michigan and Ohio, states that are very similar to Illinois in many ways, including Great Lakes water. In stepping back from lead for a second, in just looking at how these states and communities in them are seeing their water resources impacted by COVID-19, whether that's shutoffs, reconnections, what are we seeing from the other side of the Great Lakes?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we worked, throughout the region and out the country to really fight to keep folks water on and make sure people have access to water during these, really, really trying and kind of, unexpected times. And what we're seeing is that, this, if you're asking people to stay at home, right, you're mandating they stay home. The most critical thing that they need, as I mentioned, right, is access to running water in their homes, to be able to wash their hands, to be able to drink, to be able to cook, to be able to bathe. And we're seeing, across the country, plenty of people who simply, do not have that, right? In Illinois alone, as we've been looking at it, we know, for a fact there are thousands of people in their homes, without water. And same can be, said for our work in Michigan and other places. I think what we're finding is, I think water utilities and municipalities are realizing that, access to water, clean, safe water is much more of a priority for people than I think, they had really realized, right? They're seeing that, without any meaningful assistance, any meaningful affordability plans in place, right? It's going to, perpetuate a cycle that continues of our most vulnerable communities not having access, especially at times when they need it most. So I think this has really sparked conversations, locally and nationally around how do we create the infrastructure to make sure that everyone has access to water, regardless of income or ability to pay. I think that's something that's really going to be followed up on and have a lot of energy on the other side of this crisis, in states throughout the Midwest, around the country, and probably in Illinois.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that came in for anybody here who wants to tackle it, Caroline, Jeremy, Justin, and it's from one of our board members, so I'm contractually obligated to ask it, is when these water projects are going on as part of stimulus, what lessons can we learn from other places, or what can we do to ensure that those water infrastructure projects are coordinated with other underground or right-of-way projects, either in the public domain or on the private property, to ensure both greater efficiency, perhaps lower costs, and lower environmental impact? What can we do, and what are others doing to coordinate those sorts of investments? Caroline, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that was brought up. One community who has replaced all of its lead service lines is Lansing, Michigan. And they were very strategic about doing exactly what was just mentioned in that comment, which is they coordinated their lead service line replacement projects, I believe, with a stormwater infrastructure improvement project. And it actually helped them reduce costs significantly to replace lead service lines in the community. And I think that's something that the lead service line replacement collaborative also advocates for, is when you do lead service line replacements, it's much more cost effective to do it in coordination either with other infrastructure projects or kind of all at one point in time on a certain block to kind of reduce some of those costs that may happen on a one-by-one basis. So I do think it's something that we really need to pay attention to and incorporate in plans. I think that's a very good point.
Excellent. Additional point made earlier on the question about how to identify if you have lead lines. I just want to shout out to our partners at the Center for Neighborhood Technology who are experimenting with, learning from a method developed by someone else, that a way to use building permits, old handwritten building permits that exist in suburban communities in particular, but the city as well, and using new technology that can translate that old handwriting by many, many different people into intelligible data so that they can try to pinpoint where lead lines are most likely to exist. And our partners at Center for Neighborhood Technology will be working with us, MPC, in the South Suburban community of Hazel Crest, who has voluntarily stepped up to say that they want to identify where their lead lines are, and we're going to use this new method from CNT, and we'll see how it goes. We have a couple other questions coming in. While I read those, Justin, you referred a couple times to we're advocating for, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. MPC, Elevate, NRDC, we're all members of the Illinois Environmental Council in good standing. Can you talk a little bit about the work that we're doing right now with many partners who are on the call to create a centralized set of water, stormwater, equity-related recommendations to the governor, and how other folks could get involved if they wanted to?
Sure, yeah. So we are working, as Josh mentioned, with a handful of environmental organizations from across the state on developing a comprehensive water agenda for this particular moment to be submitted to the governor's office. We're working on this with the Illinois Environmental Council, and it ranges from a handful of, as I pointed out in my slide earlier, relief measures to make sure people have access to the water they need now, economic recovery measures that will induce workforce development, and also resilience measures. So making sure that our stormwater systems can operate optimally both during a crisis and not during a crisis. So there's a bunch of different issues that are in that and are something that we are working on and submitting to the governor's office. If you would like to get involved in that in any capacity, if you have ideas that you think the governor's office need to hear, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Josh, Jeremy, Caroline, and we would be happy to talk to you about how to get involved in that process.
Cool, thanks, Justin. A couple other questions here. Did someone mention a lead service line collaborative? If so, whoever mentioned it, could you say more about what that lead service line collaborative is? And how does one who is not part of the collaborative find out more about the collaborative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they provide information and resources to promote full lead service line replacement in the United States. And I can actually, in the little chat feature, type in their website, and that'll give you contact information for the collaborative, some of their leads to contact to learn more about how to get involved with the collaborative. And you can also see the list of organizations that are involved with that collaborative as well. So I'll go ahead and type that in for you.
Thanks so much, Caroline. One more question on lead, and then I'm going to pivot away to a couple of the other things that are coming in. Someone added a question that they have heard there is a $2 billion program for lead service line replacement in the city. I'm not sure that there's a program. I certainly haven't heard of one. I think that's an estimated cost for the city. I don't know that there's a program that's getting off the ground. It sounds like it's a funding issue was in the question. Yes, coming up with $2 billion would be a challenge right now. I think as we are looking at potential federal stimulus packages in the wake of COVID-19, I know that folks in Illinois are bringing lead pipe issues up there, seeking infrastructure dollar for stimulus. But I also want to reiterate that the lead pipe issues are part of a larger need for infrastructure investment in water issues. And Jeremy was alluding to some of those. So, I mean, we have water utilities who are struggling sometimes to meet compliance for drinking water standards or wastewater standards, flooding. There's a lot of infrastructure needs, and lead is a big part of them because of its public health implications, but the need is much larger. Members, including MPC, but members of the Illinois Environmental Council have been working on statewide legislation to require the removal of lead service lines for a few years now, and until we were all sent home and the General Assembly was effectively shut down. We're making good progress this year on a bill proposal that would have had a revenue stream in it that could have paid for this and relieved a lot of the burden. And we'll revisit that as soon as Springfield opens back up and we can get back to work. Somebody asked about the water agenda for the governor's office. If you want, you can send me an email directly at jls@metroplanning.org, which I'll put in the chat window, and I'm happy to chat with you directly. The question here, are income-based water rate structures being discussed as a real possibility anywhere in Illinois? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. I can tell you that right now, to our knowledge, there are no water utilities in Illinois with a income-based rate structure, meaning like a progressive, well, ideally a progressive rate structure, so that lower income individuals pay a lower rate and higher income individuals pay a higher rate. There are many utilities that have a program for seniors. There are some that have programs for low-income individuals, but it's not like the rate structure for the entire population is based on income. So it's sort of separate, small programs. You could have your rate based on income. You could also have something called an increasing block rate, so that like the first 50 gallons a day are very inexpensive, and that way you meet your basic needs. And it gets more expensive after that. For folks on the phone who are old enough to remember how long distance phone call billing used to work, that's more or less the way it was. But there are actually, we don't know of any communities that have increasing block rates in Illinois. We actually know of some that have decreasing block rates, so the water gets less expensive as you use more, because they're trying not to penalize people for watering their lawns. But we're going to talk a lot more about water affordability issues on next week's call, including talking through some research that MPC, Elevate Energy, and the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant have done together. Another question coming in about examples that we've heard of from utilities across the country responding to issues being made manifest by COVID-19. Be interested to hear from folks about what they're hearing from other places. I can tell you that we did get some good anecdotes out of that survey that Caroline was describing that the Illinois chapter of the American Water Works Association did. Some communities, even places like Aurora, who remember is the second biggest municipality in Illinois, they, as soon as they heard that folks were going to have to be staying at home, they already had a list of people whose water services have been shut off for some reason, and they just went around and reconnected everybody's water, and they're figuring out how folks will pay for it on the other end. And we've heard from several utilities that they've been doing that. But interested to hear from Jeremy or Caroline or Justin, other stories you're hearing from water utilities elsewhere in the country responding to some of these issues that we should get into the mix here in Illinois. Jeremy, take it away.
Sure thing. I can dive into that. You know, it's really been twofold, right? I think it's been, you know, utilities, water utilities really stepping up and proactively, you know, making the decisions to make sure that, you know, everybody's, you know, going to have access to water regardless of, you know, ability to pay during these times. And for us, that's looked like, you know, moratoriums on shutoffs. And as Josh mentioned in particular, many utility companies, either by choice or by mandate, are working to reconnect. I think the difficult thing has been for a lot of utilities determining where water is shut off, where that data is, and getting to it in a timely manner. But reconnections have been really big. I've also seen really the expansion of low-income assistance, you know, water assistance programs that will, you know, kick in, the plans are made and will kick in, you know, following the COVID crisis, but also, you know, the suspension of late fees or the accumulation of other fees in the time that, you know, residents aren't able to pay. And then some, you know, municipalities, not necessarily water systems, but, you know, working in conjunction with water systems to identify the hardest hit areas. You know, states and municipalities are doing emergency water distribution as they work, you know, around the clock to get people's, you know, water turned back on as well. So it's been, you know, it's been a joint effort, I think, by water utilities and state and local policymakers to make sure that people have access to water during these times.
Great. Justin, Caroline, anything else on that question about examples from other places? Yeah, Justin.
I did just want to, I don't have any additional information about examples from other places, but I did just want to tag on to something that Jeremy just said and was sort of, when Jeremy was talking about funding sources, somebody in the chat box asked if there were any funding for utilities in any of the federal bills that have come out and the federal support that's come out recently. And the answer to that is unfortunately no. There has been no support for utilities that I'm aware of anyway. There was an attempt to get funding for a low-income bill assistance program into one of the amendments to the most recent CARES Act, but that, or the second to most recent CARES Act, I suppose. But that did not ultimately get passed. So when Jeremy talks about the need for funding and the need to advocate for state funding, I think that that is especially important given that the federal government has not yet taken action on this.
Justin, since you have the mic, there's a follow-up question on some of the research you had dug up looking at job creation. Do you have a sense of why we see larger job creation outcomes in the water sector as compared to some others?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's something that we'll follow up on. Yeah.
Whoever, that question came from an anonymous attendee. If you email jwilliams@metroplanning.org, he will find an answer for you. Also, since we have such a good community of attendees today, someone alerted me that in fact, CMAP has identified that there are a handful of communities in our region who do have increasing block rates for water. And we will figure out who those communities are and make sure that we highlight them next week as a way to bake equity and sustainability into your water rate. One of the other questions that came in is, other than dollars for funding, are there any other hurdles that keep programs from getting started or impact efficiencies? and I would like to tackle this one and invite others to weigh in. One of the challenges that we have in Northeastern Illinois in particular, that is not so prevalent in other parts of the country, is the sheer amount of water utilities that we have. And you know, City of Chicago is a big one, and I'm talking about drinking water here. The City of Chicago is a very large one. We have a handful, and I mean a very small handful, of collaborative water agencies, joint water authorities in the suburbs, but there's really only a couple. And then essentially every other community is on their own. If you're on Lake Michigan water, there are, say, a dozen communities that pump water from Lake Michigan and sell it to neighbors to the west. And then everyone else is buying water from someone, and often they bought it from someone else, and sometimes they bought it from someone else. And I think 5 or 6 connections is the longest connection line we have. And then we also have groundwater and river water communities to the west and southwestern part of the region. But you have a lot of water utilities that are very small rate bases, infrastructure that perhaps was built to serve industry that's no longer there, or other land uses that have changed. And to be honest, many of these utilities are struggling to keep up with the basics. And so, yeah, other than dollars for funding, are there any hurdles that keep programs like major infrastructure projects or anything else from getting started? In my mind, it's this fragmentation of the management of the system that is a huge one. You don't get economies of scale, you don't get efficiencies for communities, and we'll talk about this more next week, for communities who have, you know, say only a residential population now, or only a high-income population, or only a low-income population. It really constrains your options when that's the case. And the question is, what to do about it? There are some folks who argue that regionalization or consolidation of some utilities is something we should pursue, but there have been experiences recently in places like Michigan and Ohio, and this is where I'm going to ask Jeremy to pop in and talk about the experience on the other side of the lakes with some consolidation of utilities that we should be thinking about here in Illinois if that's a path that we pursue. The other options would be some sort of bailouts or subsidies or wholesale changes in the way that we make allocations of Lake Michigan water. There are other options, but regionalization is one that comes up a lot, and we haven't seen much of it since the 80s when a bunch of the groundwater communities moved to Lake Michigan water. That was a sort of an existential crisis moment for those communities, and I'm just wondering people's take on whether this moment of such huge revenue declines is another existential crisis that might lead to some changes in how we govern water systems. Jeremy, you have any thoughts on the experience of regionalization or consolidation in Michigan and Ohio you want to offer here?
Yeah, I do. And I think like you mentioned, the issue's a mixed bag, right? I think we're, you know, kind of going back to you talking about how many, you know, the thousands of systems, you know, small water systems that are servicing these, you know, small rural or suburban communities, and the, you know, ones who are, you know, supporting, you know, big urban areas. There are so many systems out there that it's hard to really navigate. And I think, you know, if you talk to, you know, some of our partners in the, you know, down south and out west, they're more inclined to say yes to, you know, consolidation or regionalization, because it means that they would get, you know, served by a bigger, better, more affordable system than the smaller ones that they're dealing with, you know, in some of their areas. But in, you know, places like Michigan and Ohio, and especially in urban areas, we've seen, you know, these same conversations taking place over regionalization. You know, I think it's a tense topic for a lot of people, right? Because I think it's not always done equitably. I think if regionalization, you know, will be taking place in ways that we've seen in Detroit, where regionalization has resulted in still some of the highest, you know, water bills in the country, and hasn't served, you know, the most vulnerable populations in a meaningful way. You're talking to folks there, it'd be more difficult to have these conversations, similar in Cleveland, right? But when we think about, you know, doing this in a way that communities at the table, doing it in a way where we talk about income-based rates and assistance that prioritizes those most vulnerable, I think it can be successfully done, but it just really depends on the community and the really democratic process in which that decision is made.
Yeah, and then the distribution of costs and who's paying what after you've consolidated everything. one of the challenges here is that, I mean, I think some of the suburban communities that were all like kind of similar to each other are the ones that already consolidated because it was pretty easy. Where you have the communities that would seem to benefit the most from joining a larger system, the question is, what is the incentive to maybe some of their surrounding utilities who are in a better financial position to absorb or join or merge this? And so this is not a path we have gone very far down. It's an idea that's out there, and we need to be prudent about it, but careful about it, so that it actually helps the folks we want it to. There was a question that came in about forecasting the type of support we can expect from the federal government. I don't think any of us here know what kind of support to expect from the federal government in terms of COVID-19 related relief. I will say, I know Justin and I were on the phone with Senator Duckworth's office the other day, and as a reminder, she holds a senior position on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and her staff that we were speaking with are not clear whether there will be another COVID-19 response or stimulus package that includes major infrastructure. And then we heard later from Representative Quigley's office that there probably would be, and then we heard later that there might not be. So we don't know. So could there be an infusion of funds? Sure, maybe. We don't know to what extent. I think what folks need to also be thinking about is that we already get federal funds into the state of Illinois for water resources issues. There's an annual infusion of funds into the state revolving loan funds. These are infrastructure loan funds that are managed by Illinois EPA. The Water Resources Defense Act is up for renewal. There are a bunch of federal levers that could potentially be pulled right now to secure more resources. But to some of the questions that have been asked already, while new money would be nice, not all of the changes that need to be made are about infusions of new money. Changing your water rates, changing your policies with shutoffs and reconnections don't require external infusions of money, and we need to be thinking about all of them. We have one other question here. I think it's the only one we haven't addressed yet, maybe two. A question about stormwater. And I will say we're going to talk more about stormwater on the third call in this series, but because this one's particularly timely, I'll take it. The question is, stormwater credit trading has not taken off from its moment in DC, where it seems to be building social equity as a wealth transfer from downtown developers to things like church parking lots and outlying neighborhoods who are developing stormwater facilities and selling credits into the market. This call may be mostly about potable water, but I'd be thrilled to hear your point of view on that approach. Well, Joyce, who submitted the question, actually this Thursday, MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District here, has on its agenda a ordinance change to the county stormwater ordinance that would remove some barriers to stormwater credit trading in 2 of the 6 suburban watersheds, so the Lower Des Plaines watershed and the Little Calumet watershed. And those changes are something that MPC and the Nature Conservancy have been working on for years, along with other folks. And the premise there is that we would start a 5-year pilot period where you could build stormwater infrastructure in one place, sell credits for development occurring elsewhere, which means a couple of things as it relates to hopefully building social equity, financial equity, and wealth in communities that need it. One, land that has been sitting fallow or unusable, vacant lots, something like that, may, if they're in a flood-prone area, suddenly have value because you could work with an outside investor, which is what these churches are doing in DC, to develop a stormwater facility and then sell those credits for development that is occurring elsewhere, which is in itself good because you'll get stormwater solutions in neighborhoods that perhaps are not getting them right now. And it also should reduce the cost of development in places, perhaps infill development near train stations or smaller lots where the cost of development has become a burden. And that, if those sites can in fact buy credits instead of selling credits, could also generate more economic development, job creation, wealth generation in the same communities. So that vote is on Thursday. If folks are interested in learning more about that, please email me about that, again, at jellis@metroplanning.org. But yeah, stormwater credit trading, if we get a good vote on Thursday, which we believe we will, should be a reality here in suburban Chicago very soon. I think, and then the last question we had, well, this is similar to somewhat about the conversation about regionalization. Is this a moment to pitch new coordinating entities or roles for the city and state who could help align economic development, water infrastructure? Is it? Sure. I think it's a moment for that. I think right now, most of the water operators that we have talked to and worked with are figuring out how to make their systems work, how to ensure that we get water to people. I think the big thinking about where we go from this moment is yet to come. And I think right now we've been focused on getting water to people and getting to people to water, and then thinking about how in these federal stimulus packages, maybe for infrastructure or something like that, we would promote some job creation. I think that the question you're asking are, is this a moment for the city, the state, MWRD to coordinate better on larger scale economic development opportunities? I think is a real one. I don't think it's one that is first and foremost in a lot of water utility directors' minds or other water folks. And I'm not sure how we get that discussion going. But I know it was submitted by Current, and I know that they're working hard on it. A couple of questions came in through the chat instead of the Q&A, so I just want to make sure that we talk about that. And this is a good one for Caroline to handle. The question is, if I heard correctly, there's LIHEAP and weatherization assistance that could be made available to folks, and that is the case. We've talked a little bit about a water version of that. Caroline, can you talk a little bit about affordability programs for what we've learned from energy-related affordability programs that might be brought to bear on water affordability programs that don't currently exist?
Yeah. So, I mean, in general, I do kind of think water utilities are a little bit behind in terms of what we're seeing in the energy world. So, for example, we don't have like a low-income heating energy assistance program on the water side in the state of Illinois. But like Josh just mentioned, that's something that we're actively pushing for and exploring. But I think, you know, everyone is starting to pay more and more attention to some of the assistance programs that some water utilities throughout the country have, and that energy utilities have, to kind of see how they might be replicated at water utilities. I know the city of Chicago is piloting a utility billing relief program. So that's something that we're seeing coming out now and should be in more of a formal form this summer. So we're seeing that come up, and that's giving relief on bills depending on your income in the city of Chicago. So that's certainly something that we're seeing. Beyond some programs like that, you're also seeing help with home repairs. If you have, you know, maybe leaks in your home, you don't have a very water efficient devices in your home, you're also seeing some programs throughout the country that are helping homeowners identify leaks and make those repairs as well. So you're seeing some billing relief, and then also some water efficiency programs to help people really tackle water affordability challenges on more of a holistic kind of front. So I don't think there's like one solution that's going to help everyone, but kind of looking at different approaches to providing a more holistic way to really help tackle water affordability. And I think it's something that, you know, locally, statewide, and federally, we need to look at to address this comprehensively.
Great. One more question we had here is actually a door opener for some research that Justin has been doing along with our Director of Research, Dan Cooper, at MPC. The question is, what is revolving loan funds? So every state in the country has revolving loan funds. So these are loans provided by the state, usually by their version of the Environmental Protection Agency, but sometimes other departments. Loans provided to water utilities. There's two categories. There's a drinking water revolving loan fund, and most other states call it the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, which is where wastewater and stormwater fall. These are loan programs that are fueled with federal and state contributions every year, and they're available to communities to upgrade infrastructure to get into compliance with either the Clean Water Act or the Safe Drinking Water Act. Here in Illinois, they're managed by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. And these programs make loans to utilities, in hundreds of millions of dollars a year at low interest rates, lower than you can usually get on the open market going to a bank or some other lender. And they're used extensively throughout the state. Some of the challenges that we've seen, and Justin and Dan have started digging into this, challenges we've seen in the past are administrative burdens to those loans, which are impediments to the lowest income communities in the states actually applying in the first place, let alone getting the loans. You can't, for a long time, you weren't able to include the design and engineering costs of your project in the loan funds. I think that's been addressed. But that meant that you had to front a bunch of costs in order to apply for the loans, and then you couldn't get recouped for those costs. What that meant was that communities essentially couldn't apply in the first place. There are still some administrative challenges. It takes a long time to get these loans. But what we're seeing is that the state is trying to forgive some portion of the loan or offer different interest rates, partially based on income, partially based on community size. And that's, in the last couple of years, there's been a much more concerted effort to do that. And Justin, you want to jump in? You've been looking at some of the data here to see what the performance of that is and who really is and isn't getting the money, even as we've tried to do that. And this is research we haven't released yet, so you are hearing this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say just preliminarily, I think that what we're noticing is that disproportionately the communities that are receiving any kind of loan tend to be significantly wider and significantly higher income than the state average. And we don't really know why yet. And as Josh mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency has been working to try to figure out what's going on. But it is a trend that we're noticing that lower income communities and communities of color are tending not to receive these loans at as high. They're less likely to receive these loans in the first place. Yeah, I think that's what I feel comfortable sharing right now.
Yeah, and I think our take on the data and anecdotally is not, to be very clear, not that communities of color or lower income communities are being turned down for the loans. What we believe to be the case is that they're not applying for the loans in the first place because of these continuing administrative barriers. But that's what the loan funds are. They're sitting there. There's money. The question is, how do we better enable communities to get access to it? For rural communities, the Illinois EPA has a partnership with the Illinois Rural Water Association. The Rural Water Association helps lower income rural communities apply for those loans. They help them with the paperwork. They provide technical assistance. Currently, we don't have a model for that in urban or suburban Illinois. I know that Illinois EPA and don't think I'll get in trouble if I say Illinois EPA and CMAP are talking, CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, are talking about that kind of model and what it could look like in Chicago and really more in the suburbs of Chicago. But as the moment, it doesn't exist yet. So the money's there. The question is, how do we get the communities that it was designed to help? How do we make sure that they have access to the funds that are already sitting there? One more question. This is probably a Caroline one. Are you aware of policy in the city of Chicago that you can't get a meter installed if you're overdue on paying the bill? What is the relationship between bill payment, meter installation? Caroline, do you know the city policy on that?
I don't. Yeah, I would recommend reaching out to the city on that, but I do know there's kind of the hold on doing anything with water meter exchanges right now just because of the lead study. So that's all the information I have. Yeah, Celeste, we can, that question was submitted by Celeste Hammond. We can follow up with you directly about that. I'm not sure, unless Jeremy or Justin know that we know the specific answer to that. I think that is the end of all of the questions that we have received, either through the chat function or the Q&A. So with that,
I just want to thank all of our participants, and if I could invite everyone for just one final thought on what our attendees can take away from, or needs that we need to be mindful of as we think about water resources, stimulus, response to COVID-19. Any final thoughts for folks on the phone today? Caroline, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just really important for us to really use this as a moment to think very seriously about water affordability and to have serious conversations about solutions that communities, states, and federal government can push forward to really help our most vulnerable customers not only have access to water, but to not get behind on bills in the first place. So I think this is a really important moment for all of us to have these conversations. But I also think we're seeing that there are some real opportunities to really build a water workforce of the future and really stimulate our economy to help with a lot of the infrastructure challenges I think were really shown during today's webinar. So I just hope we don't lose these conversations and really use them to push.
Caroline disappeared there at the end, but that's all right. I think we got it. Thank you very much. Jeremy, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, being a part of this conversation has been terrific. I think there's you know, the crisis that we're in the midst of has exposed a lot of inequities within, you know, drinking water and even our, you know, wastewater infrastructure. And, you know, glad that folks were able to join us in such high numbers today and stay on, and looking forward to joining next week as well and continuing this conversation.
Great, Jeremy. Justin, any final thoughts?
I would just echo much of what Caroline and Jeremy have already said, and I think that water infrastructure investment at this moment is going to be especially critical for any kind of economic recovery. And yeah, I think it's really important that the federal government knows the value of that for an economic recovery.
Thanks, Justin. The only thing I would add, in addition to my thanks for everyone, is that you know, priorities, whether it's federal, state, local, the priorities that the decision makers and the policy makers are grappling with right now are obviously informed by folks that they're hearing from. And if you are on this call, listening in, submitting questions, curious to know more, it's probably because you think water resources all the time, but specifically in this time because of access issues, because of shortages, are important. And so make sure that the folks who are making decisions in your community or for your state or for the federal level are hearing from you that you want to see water issues in the mix. Multiple times today, I said, if you're interested in learning more, you can contact me. You can do that at jls@metroplanning.org, which I'll share here in the chat. And then we are having 2 more events in this series. So I'll pull that back up real quick. The next week is May 12th, also Tuesday, also 3:30, where we'll be focused on water affordability in Northeastern Illinois. Again, this is, we're going to share some research that MPC, Elevate Energy, and the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant did with funding from the Joyce Foundation and the Mott Foundation. To really look at how water utilities, to our knowledge, are and are not accounting for water affordability as they're setting rates. And I think the story that we will tell illuminates that way more people in way more places are probably struggling with water bills than we had previously thought. And that has a direct relation to shutoffs and reconnections. And Jeremy will be joining us along with me and Caroline again to talk about how that has been dealt with in more detail in some other places. And then we'll be back in a couple weeks, May 19th, solutions for stormwater and water quality in this moment. Again, thinking not only about the immediate response to slowing the spread of COVID-19, but stimulus to get things going. And then ultimately, how do we build back better so that we avoid the problems of today. So I want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you all for your questions. Look for the recording link and the PowerPoint link in a follow-up email. And thank you all very much for joining us today. We hope to see you again next week and the week after. Much appreciated. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.